Cover-up culture. Related to blame is the issue of cover-ups. Just like blame is a sign of shame-based organization, cover-up cultures depend on shame to keep folks quiet. When the culture of an organization mandates that it is more important to protect the reputation of a system and those in the power than it is to protect the basic human dignity of individuals or communities, you can be certain that shame is systemic. Money drives ethics, and accountability is that. This is true in all systems, from corporations, nonprofits, universities, and governments, to churches, schools, families, and sport programs. If you think back on any major incident fueled by cover-ups, you will see this pattern. In an organizational culture where respect and the dignity of individual are held as the highest values, shame and blame don't work as management styles. There is no leading by fear, empathy is a valued asset, accountability is an expectation rather than an exception, and the primal human need for belonging is not used as leverage on social control. We can't control the behavior of individuals, however, we can cultivate organizational cultures where behaviors are not tolerated and people are held accountable for protecting what matters most, humans being. We won't solve the complex issue that we are facing today without creativity, innovation, and engaged learning. We can't afford to let our discomfort with the topic of shame get in the way of recognizing and combating it in our schools and workplaces. And the four best strategies for building shame resilient organizations are number one, supporting leaders who are willing to talk greatly and facilitate honest conversation about shame and cultivate shame resilient cultures. Number two, facilitating a conscientious effort to see where shame might be functioning in the organization and how it might even be creeping into the way we engage with our coworkers and students. Number three, normalizing is a critical shame resilience strategy. Leaders and managers can cultivate engagement by helping people know what to expect and what are common struggles. How have other people dealt with them, and what have your experiences been? The last, number four, training all employees on the differences between shame and guilt and teaching them how to give and receive feedback in a way that fosters growth and engagement. Minding the gap with feedback. A daring greatly culture is a culture of honest, constructive, and engaged feedback. This is true in organizations, schools, and families. I know families struggle with this issue, however, I was shocked to see lack of feedback emerge as a primary concern in the interviews and that focus on work experiences. Today's organization are so metric focused in their evaluation of performance that giving, receiving, and soliciting valuable feedback, ironically, has become rare. It's even a rarity in schools where learning depends on feedback, which is infinitely more effective than grades scribble on the top of the page of or computer-generated standardized test scores. The problem is straightforward. Without feedback, there can be no transformative change. When we don't talk to the people we are leading about their strengths and their opportunity for growth, they begin to question their contributions and our commitment. Disengagement follows. When I ask people why there was such a lack of feedback in their organization and schools, and they used different language, but the two major issues were the same. One, we are not comfortable with hard conversations. Two, we don't know how to give and receive feedback in a way that moves people and processes forward. The good news is that these are very fixable problems if an organization makes the creation of a feedback culture a priority and a practice rather than an aspirational value. It can happen. People are desperate for feedback. We all want to grow. We just need to learn how to give feedback in a way that inspires growth and engagement. And right off the bat, I believe that feedback thrives in culture where the global is not getting comfortable with hard conversations, but normalizing discomfort in if leaders expect real learning, critical thinking, and change, then discomfort should be normalized. We believe growth and learning are uncomfortable, so it's going to happen here. You are going to feel that way We want you to know that it's normal and it's an expectation here. You are not alone, and we ask that you stay open and lean into it. This is true at all levels and in all organizations, school, faith communities, and even families. I've observed this pattern of normalized discomfort in the wholehearted organization I have researched and I have lived it in my classroom and with my family. I learned to teach by immersing myself in books on engage and critical pedagogy by writers like Bell Hooks and Paulo Freire. At first I was terrified by the idea that if education is going to be transformative, it's going to be uncomfortable and unpredictable. And now, as I begin my 15-year-old teaching at the University of Houston, I always tell my students, if you are comfortable, I'm not teaching, and you are not learning, it's going to get uncomfortable in here, and that's okay. It's normal and it's a part of the process. The simple and honest process of letting people know that discomfort is normal, it's going to happen, why it happens, and why it's important. Reduce anxiety, fear, and shame. Periods of discomfort become an expectation and norm. In fact, most semesters I have students who approach me after class and say, I haven't been uncomfortable yet, I'm concerned. And this exchange often lead to critically important conversation and feedback about their engagement in my teaching. The big challenge for leaders is getting our heads and hearts around the fact that we need to cultivate the courage to be uncomfortable and to teach the people around us how to accept discomfort as a part of a growth. For the best guidance on how to give it back that move people and process forward, I took my social work roots. In my experience and the heart of valuable feedback is taking the strange perspective. According to social work educator Dennis Salaby, viewing performance from the strange perspective offers us the opportunity to examine our struggle in light of our capacities, talent, competencies, possibilities, vision, values, and hopes. This perspective does not dismiss the serious nature of our struggles, however, it does require us to consider our positive qualities as potential resources, and Dr. Salaby proposed it is as wrong to deny the possible as it is to deny the problem. One effective method for understanding our strengths is to examine the relationship between strength and limitation. If we look at what we do best as well as what we want to change the most, we will often find that the two are varying degrees of the same core behavior, and most of us can go through the majority of our faults and limitation and find strength lurking within. For example, I can beat myself up for being too controlling and micromanaging, and I can recognize that I'm very responsible, dependable, and committed to quality work. The micromanaging issues don't go away, but by viewing them from a strange perspective, I have the confidence to look at myself and assess the behaviors I would like to change. I want to emphasize that strange perspective is not a tool to simply allow us to put a positive spin on a problem and consider itself, but my first enabling us to inventory our strange. It suggests ways we can use those strange to address the related challenges, and one way to teach I teach this perspective to students is by requiring them to give and receive feedback on their classroom presentations. When a student presents, she or he receives feedback from every one of his and or her classmates. The student in the audience have to identify three observable strengths and one opportunity for growth. The trick is that they have to use their assessment of this strength to make a suggestion on how the individual might address the specified opportunity. For example, strange. You capture my interest right away with your emotional personal story. You used examples that are relevant to my life. You concluded with actionable strategies that tied with our learning in the class. Opportunity. Your story is an example, made me feel connected to you and what you were saying, but I sometimes struggle to read the PowerPoint and listen to you at the same time. I didn't want to miss anything you were saying, but I worried about not following the slides. You might experiment with a fewer words on slides or maybe even no slides. You had me without them. The research has made this clear. Vulnerability is at the heart of the feedback process. This is true whether we give, receive, or solicit feedback, and the vulnerability does not go away even if we are trained and experienced in offering and getting feedback. Experience does, however, give us the advantage of knowing that we can survive the exposure and uncertainty and that it's worth the risk. One of the greatest mistakes that I see people make in the feedback process is armoring up. To protect ourselves from the vulnerability of giving or receiving feedback, we get ready to rumble. It's easy to assume that the feedback process only feels vulnerable for the person receiving the feedback, but that's not true. Honest engagement around expectation and behavior is always fraught with uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure for everyone involved. Here is an example. Susan, the principal of a large high school, has to talk to one of her teachers about several parent complaints, and the parents have voiced concern about the teacher cursing during class and making personal calls on her cell phones while she allowed her student to leave the class, go goof off, and make their own calls. And this situation or mooring up can take several forms. One is that Susan can fill out the probation from and have it sitting on her desk when the teacher comes in. Civil simplicity. Here is the complaint. I have written you up for the following offenses. Sign here and don't let it happen again. She snuck out the meeting in 3 minutes flat, and there is no feedback, no growth, no learning, but it's over. The odds of the teacher changing her behaviors are slim. Another way we are more up is by convincing ourselves that the other person deserves to be hurt or put down. Like most of us, Susan is more comfortable with anger than vulnerability, so she ratchets up her confidence with a little self-righteous. I'm so sick of this. If these teachers respected me, they would never do stuff like this. I have had that. It's been a problem since the first day I met her. You want to check around in class? Go for it. I will show you exactly how this works. The opportunity for constructive feedback and relationship building turns into a smackdown. Again, it's over, but there is no feedback, no growth, and no learning, and more like no change. I will admit that I have got a lot of bring it on in me. I'm scrappy. I think fast on my feet and I like in my emotions. With a little agency, I'm good at anger and also at vulnerability or mooring up before vulnerable experience is attractive to me. Luckily, this work has taught me that when I feel self-righteous, it means that I'm afraid. It's a way to puff up and protect myself when I'm afraid of being wrong, making someone angry, or getting blamed. Sitting on the same side of the table. In my social work training, a lot of attention was paid to how we talk to people, even down to where and how we sit. For example, I would never talk to a client across the desk. I would walk around my desk and sit in the chair across from the client so there was nothing big and bulky between us. I remember the first time I went in to see one of my social work professor about a grade. She got up from behind her desk and asked me to take a seat at the small round table she had in her office. She pulled up a chair and sat next to me. In our morning hour for the conversation, I had pictured her sitting behind her big metal desk and me defiantly sliding my paper across it and demanding an explanation for my grade. After she sat down next to me, I put the paper on the table and she said, "I'm so glad that you came in to talk to me about your paper. So did a great job on this. I loved your conclusion." And patted me on the back. I awkwardly realized that we were on the same side of the table. Totally discombobulated, I blurted, "Thank you, I worked really hard on it." She nodded and said, "I can tell you thank you. I took some point of for your APA formatting. I would like for you to focus on that and get it cleaned up. You can submit this for publication and I don't want to reference formatting to hold you back." I was still confused. "I think it's publishable. Still like it. Do you need some help with the APA formatting? It's tricky and it took me years to get it down," she asked. A great example of normalizing. I told her that I would fix the references and I asked her if she would look at my revision. She happily agreed and gave me a few tips on the process. I thank her for her time and love, grateful for my grade and for the teacher who cared as much as she did. Today, sitting on the same side of the table is metaphor for feedback. I use it to create my Engage feedback checklist. I know I'm ready to give my feedback when I'm ready to sit next to you rather than across from you. I'm willing to put the problem in front of us rather than between us or sliding it toward you. I'm ready to listen, ask questions, and accept that I may not fully understand the issue. I want to acknowledge what you do well instead of picking apart of your mistakes. I recognize your strengths and how you can use them to address your challenges. I can hold you accountable without shaming or blaming you. I'm willing to own my part. I can genuinely thank you for your effort rather than to criticize you for your failing. I can talk about how resolving these challenges will lead to your growth and opportunity, and I can model the vulnerability and openness that the courage to be vulnerable. I recently gave a talk at the University of Houston's Wolf Center for Entrepreneurship, the program which pairs 35 to 40 elite undergraduate students with mentors and offers comprehensive business training. Is ranked as the leading undergrad entrepreneurship program in the United States. I was asked to talk to the students about vulnerability and the power of story. During the question and answer session after my talk, one of the students asked me a question that I'm sure is often on the minds of the people when I talk about vulnerability. He said, I can see how vulnerability is important, but I am in sales and I don't get what that looks like. Does being vulnerable mean that if a customer asks me questions about the product and I don't know the answer, I just say what I'm thinking? I am new and I really don't know what I'm doing. The students who were all turned around listening to him turned back in their chairs and looked at me as if to say, yeah, that seems lame. Are we really supposed to do that? My answer was no and yes. In that scenario, vulnerability is recognizing and owning that you don't know something. It's looking the customer in the eye and saying, I don't know the answer to that, but I will find out. I want to make sure you have the correct information. I explained that the unwillingness to engage with vulnerability of not knowing often leads to making excuses, dodging the question, or worst case scenario, bullshitting. That's the top blow in any relationship. And then one thing I have learned from talking to people who sell for a living is that sales is all about relationships. So, well, I wouldn't take that talk with the customer. I do think there is some value in sharing a feeling of not knowing what you are doing with someone, whether a mentor who can offer support and guidance or a college who can help you learn and normalize your experience. Imagine the stress and anxiety of not knowing what you are doing, trying to convince a customer that you do, not being able to ask for help, and not having anyone to talk to about your struggle. And this is how we lose people. It's too difficult to stay engaged in these circumstances. We start cutting corners. We stop caring. I would check out. After my talk, one of the mentors come up to me and say, I have been in sales my entire career, and I let me tell you, there is nothing more important than having the courage to say, I don't know, and I messed up. Being honest and open is key to success in every part of our lives. Last year, I had the opportunity to interview Kay Gaddis, the owner and founder of T3, the think tank in Austin, Texas. T3 is a top integrated marketing firm that specializes in innovative marketing campaigns that cut across all media. In 1989, Kay cashed in a $16,000 IRA with the dream of starting an advertising agency. 23 years after opening, with a handful of regional accounts, Kay has built T3 into the nation's largest advertising agency, wholly owned by a woman. With offices in Austin, New York, and San Francisco, T3 worked with clients including Microsoft, UPS, JP Morgan Chase, Pfizer, Allstate, Coca-Cola, and Sprite. And her dynamic business acumen and corporate culture have led to national recognition. She has been named one of the Fast Company's top 25 women business builders in magazine's top 10 entrepreneurs of the year and one of the top 25 advertising working mother of the year by Working Mother magazines. Kay and T3's family-friendly workplace program, T3 and Under, was even recognized by the White House. I jumped right into my interview with Kay about telling her that a business journalist had recently told me that unlike leaders in corporations who are shielded by layers of systems, entrepreneurs cannot afford to be vulnerable. When I asked her what she thought about that position, she smiled. When you shut down vulnerability, you shut down opportunity. Here is how she explained it. By definition, entrepreneurship is vulnerable. It's all about the ability to handle and manage uncertainty. People are constantly changing. Budgets change. Boards change. Competitions mean you have to stay nimble and innovative. You have to create a vision and live up to that vision, and there is no vision without vulnerability. Knowing that Kay spends a considerable amount of time teaching and mentoring, I asked her what advice she gives new entrepreneurs about embracing uncertainty. She said, success requires entrepreneurs to cultivate a strong support network and good mentors. You need to learn how to shut out the noise so you can get clear on how you feel and what you think, and then you do the hard work, no questions. It's all about vulnerability. Another great example of the power of vulnerability, this time in a corporation, is the leadership approach taken by Lululemon CEO, Kristen Day. In a video interview with CNN Money, Day explained that she was once a very bright, smart executive who majored in the being right. Her transformation came when she realized that getting people to engage and take ownership was not about the telling, but about letting them come into the idea in a purpose-led way, and that her job was creating the space for others to perform. She characterized this change as the shift from having the best idea or problem solving to being the best leader of people. The shift she described is the shift from controlling to engaging with vulnerability, taking risks and cultivating trust. And while vulnerability can sometimes make us feel powerless, her shift was a total power move. In a written interview with the accompanying the video, the idea of vulnerability as the birthplace of creativity, innovations, and trust continue to play out. Even when it comes to failure and defeat, one of these leadership guideposts is finding the magic makers. As they explain, taking responsibility, taking risks, and having an entrepreneurial spirit are qualities we look for in our employee. We want people who bring their own magic. Athletes are great with our culture. They are used to winning as well as losing. They know how to handle and fix defeat. And they also emphasize the importance of allowing people to make mistakes. Our golden rule, if you screw up, you clean it up. In business, school, faith, communities, and system, even families, we can tell a lot about how people engage with vulnerability by observing how often and how openly you hear people saying, I don't know, I need help, I would like to give it a shot, it's important to me, I disagree, can we talk about it? It didn't work, but I learned a lot. Yes, I did it. Here is what I need. Here is how I feel. I would like some feedback. Can I get your take on this? What can I do better next time? Can you teach me how to do this? I played a part in that. I accept responsibility for that. I'm here for you. I want to help. Let's move on. I'm sorry. That means a lot to me. Thank you. For leaders, vulnerability overlooks and feels like discomfort. In his book Tribes, we need you to lead us, said Godin writes. Leadership is scarce because few people are willing to go through the discomfort required to lead, and this scarcity makes leadership valuable. It's uncomfortable to stand up in front of strangers. It's uncomfortable to propose an idea that might fail. It's uncomfortable to challenge the status quo. It's uncomfortable to resist the urge to settle. When you identify the discomfort, you have found the place where a leader is needed. If you are not comfortable in your work as a leader, it's almost certain you are not reaching your potential as a leader. As I look over the data and read through my notes from the interviews I have done with leaders, I wonder what students would say to teachers and what teachers would say to their principals if they had the opportunity to ask for the leadership they needed. I wonder what the customer service representative would say to his boss and what she might ask for her of her boss. What do we want the people to know about us and what do we need from them? As I started writing down the answers to this question, I realized that this sounded like a mandate, a manifesto, and here is what emerged from the questions. The Daring Greatly Leadership Manifesto. To the CEOs and teachers, to the principals and the managers, to the politicians, community leaders, and decision makers, we want you to show up. We want you to learn and we want to inspire. We are hardwired for connection, curiosity, and engagement. We crave purpose and we have a deep desire to create and contribute. We want to take a risk, embrace our vulnerabilities, and be courageous. When learning and working are dehumanized, when you will no longer see us and no longer encourage our daring, or when you only see what we produce or how we perform, we disengage and turn away from the very things that the world needs from us: our talent, our ideas, and our passion. What we ask is that you engage with us, show up beside us, and learn from us. Feedback is a function of respect. When you don't have honest conversation with us about our strengths and our opportunities for growth, we question our contribution and your commitment. Above all else, we ask that you show up, let yourself be seen, and be courageous and dare greatly with us. Chapter 7, Wholehearted Parenting, Daring to be the adults we want our children to be. Who we are and how we engage with the world are much stronger predictors of how our children will do than what we know about parenting. In terms of teaching our children to dare greatly in the never enough culture, the question is not so much, are you parenting the right way as it is? Are you the adult that you want your child to grow up to be? Parenting in a culture of never enough, and most of us will love a color-coded parenting handbook that answers all of our unanswerable questions, comes with the guarantees, and minimizes our vulnerability. We want to know that if we follow certain rules or adhere to the method espoused by a certain parenting expert, our children will sleep through the night, be happy, make friends, achieve professional success, and stay safe. The uncertainty of parenting can bring up feelings in us that range from frustration or to terror. Our need for certainty and for uncertainty as a raising children makes explicit how to parent strategies both seductive and dangerous. I say dangerous because certainty often breeds absolutes, intolerance, and judgment. And that's why parents are so critical of one another. We latch onto a method or approach, and very quickly our way becomes the way when we obsess over our parenting choices to the extent that most of us do, and then see someone else making different choices. We often perceive the difference as direct criticism of how we are parenting. Ironically, parenting is a sim and judgment minefield precisely because most of us are wading through uncertainty and self-doubt when it comes to raising our children. And after all, we rarely engage in a self-righteous judgment when we feel confident about our decision. I'm not going to practically knock myself unconscious with a seeming eye roll about your non-organic milk if I feel good about what I'm feeding my children. But I doubt lyrics beneath my choices that self-righteous critic will spring to life in a not so subtle parenting moments that happen because my underlying fear of not being the perfect parent is driving my need to confirm that I'm the very least I'm better than you. Somewhere buried deep inside our hopes and fears for our children is the terrifying truth that there is no such a thing as a perfect parenting and there are no guarantees. From debates about attachment parenting and how much better they parent in Europe to this disparagement of tiger moms and helicopter parent and the heated discussion that occupy much of the national parenting conversation conveniently distract us from this important and difficult truth. Who we are and how we engage with the world are much stronger predictors of how our children will do than what we know about parenting. I'm not a parenting expert. In fact, I'm not sure that I even believe in the idea of parenting expert. I'm an engaged imperfect parent and a passionate researcher. And as I mentioned in the introduction, I'm an experienced map maker and a stumbling traveler like many of you. Parenting is by far my boldest and most daring adventure. From the very beginning of my research on shame, I've always collected data on parenting and paid close attention to how research participants talk about being parented and about parenting. The reason is simple. Our stories of worthiness, of being enough, begin in our first families, and the narrative certainly does not end there. But what we learn about ourselves and how we learn to engage with the world as children sets a course that either would require us to spend a significant part of our life fighting to reclaim our self-worth, or will give us hope, courage, and resilience for our journey. There is no question that our behavior, thinking, and emotions are both hardwired within us and influenced by our environment. I wouldn't hazard a guess on the percentages, and I'm convinced that we will never have a precise nature or nurture breakdown. I have no doubt, however, that when it comes to our sense of love, belonging, and worthiness, we are most radically shaped by our families of origin. What we hear, what we are told, and perhaps most importantly, how we observe our parents engaging with the world. As parents, we may have less control than we think over a temperament and personality, and less control than we want over the scarcity culture, but we do have powerful parenting opportunities in other areas. How we help our children understand, leverage, and appreciate their hardwiring, and how we teach them resilience in the face of relentless, never enough culture messages. In terms of teaching our children to dare greatly in the never enough culture, the question is not so much, are you parenting the right way as it is? Are you the adult that you want your child to grow up to be? As a Joseph Chilton Pierce right, what we are teaches the child more than what we say, so we must be what we want our children to become. Even though the vulnerability of parenting is terrifying at times, we cannot afford to armor ourselves against it or push it away. It is our richest, most fertile ground for teaching and cultivating connection, meaning, and love. Vulnerability lies at the center of the family story. It defines our moment of greatest joy, fear, sorrow, shame, disappointment, love, belonging, gratitude, creativity, and everyday wonder. Whether we are holding our children or sitting beside them, or chasing them down, or talking through their locked door, vulnerability is what shapes who we are and who our children are. By pushing away vulnerability, we turn parenting into competition that's about knowing, proving, executing, and measuring rather than being. If we put aside the question of who is better and put down the yardstick of school, admissions, grades, sports, trophies, and accomplishments, I think the vast majority of us will agree that what we want for our children is what we want for ourselves. We want to raise children who love with their whole hearts. If the wholeheartedness is the goal, then above all else, we should strive to raise children who engage with the world from a place of worthiness, embrace their vulnerabilities and imperfections, feel a deep sense of love and compassion for themselves and others, value hard work, perseverance, and respect, carry a sense of authenticity and belonging with them rather than searching for it in the external places. Have the courage to be imperfect, vulnerable, and creative. Don't fear feeling ashamed or unlovable if they are different or if they are struggling. Move through our rapidly changing world with courage and a resilient spirit. For parents, this means we are called Ubuntu, a knowledge that we cannot give our children what we don't have, and so we must let them share in our journey to grow, change, and learn, and recognize our own armor and model for our children how to take it off, be vulnerable and show up, and let ourselves be seen and known. Honor our children by continuing on our own journeys toward wholeheartedness, parent from a place of enough rather than scarcity, mind the gap and practice the values we want to teach, and dare greatly, possibly more than we have ever dared before. In other words, if we want our children to love and accept who they are, our job is to love and accept who we are. We cannot use fear, shame, blame, and judgment in our own lives if we want to raise courageous children. Compassion and connection, the very thing that gives purpose and meaning to our life, can only be learned if they are experienced in our life, in our families are our first opportunity to experience these things. In this chapter, I want to share what I have learned about worthiness, shame, resilience, and vulnerability, specifically from my parenting research. And this work has profoundly transformed the way that Steve and I think and feel about parenting. It has dramatically changed our priorities, our marriages, and our day-to-day behaviors because Steve is a pediatrician and we spend a lot of time discussing parenting research and various parenting models My goal here is not to teach you how to parent, but to share what might be a new lens through which to view the great dare of raising wholehearted children. Understanding and combating shame. It's a terrible myth, the belief that once we have a children, our journey ends and there it begins. For many of us, the most interesting and productive times in our life come after we have a children. For the majority of us, the greatest challenges and struggles come in midlife and later. Wholehearted parenting is not having it all figured out and passing it down. It's learning and exploring together. And trust me, there are times when my children are way ahead of my own journey, either waiting for me or reaching back to pull me along. As I mentioned in the introduction, if you really divide the men and women I have interviewed into two groups, and those who feel a deep sense of love and belonging, and those who struggle for it, only one variable separates the group. Those who feel lovable, who love, and who experience belonging simply believe they are worthy of love and belonging. I often say that wholeheartedness is like the North Star. We never really arrive, but we certainly know if we are headed in the right direction. Raising children who believe in the rewardiness requires us to model that journey and that struggle. The important thing to know about worthiness is that it doesn't have prerequisites. Most of us, on the other hand, have a long list of worthiness prerequisites, qualifiers that we have inherited, learned, and unknowingly picked up along the way. Most of these prerequisites fall in the categories of accomplishment, acquisition, external acceptance. It's the if or when problem. I will be worthy when blah 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 blah. Or I will be worthy if blah 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 blah. Yeah, you can fill the blah 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 by your standard. And they may not be written down, and we may not even be aware of the prerequisites, but we all have a list that says I will be worthy. When I lose the weights, I will be worthy. If I get accepted into the school, I will be worthy. If we don't get divorced, I will be worthy. If my wife is not cheating, I will be worthy. If I get promoted, I will be worthy. When I get pregnant, I will be worthy. When he asked me out, I will be worthy. When we buy a house in this neighborhood, I will be worthy if no one finds out. Shame loves prerequisites. If or when worthiness list easily doubles as the gremlins to the list, don't let her forget that her mom thinks he should lose that baby weight. Remind him that his new boss only respects guys with MBAs. Poke her if she forget that all of her friends made partner last year. As a parent, we have our children develop the same resilience and worthiness by staying very mindful about the prerequisites that we are knowingly or unknowingly handing down to them. Are we sending them over or covert messages about what makes them more and less lovable? Or are we focusing on behavior that needs to change and making it clear that their essential worthiness is not on the table? I often tell my parents that some of the most destructive covert messages that we send our children stem from the feminine and masculine norms that we discuss. Are we overtly and covertly telling our daughters that thin, nice, modest are prerequisites for worthiness? Are we teaching our girls to respect boys as tender and loving beings? Are we sending a message to our sons that we expect them to be emotionally stoic? To put money and status first and to be aggressive? Are we teaching our sons to respect women and girls as smart and capable people, not objects? Perfectionism is another form of prerequisites. In a dozen of years of studying worthiness, I'm convinced that perfectionism is actually contagious. If we struggle with being living, looking absolutely perfect, we might get well line our children up and slip this little perfection straight jacket right over their heads. And this is a reminder. From chapter 4, perfectionism is not teaching them how to strive for excellence or being their best selves. Perfectionism is teaching them to value what other people think over what they think or how they feel. It's teaching them to perform, please, and prove. And unfortunately, I have many examples from my life. For instance, when Ellen got her first started at school, she immediately broke down crying. She was so upset about breaking the rule and upsetting her teacher or the principal that she just fell apart. We kept telling her that it was not a big deal and that everyone is late sometimes until she felt better. And that evening we celebrated surviving our first tardy with a little tardy party after dinner. She finally agreed that it was not a big deal and that the other people probably didn't judge her from being human. And fast forward 4 days to Sunday morning. We are running late and for courage and I'm in tears. Why can't we ever get out of here on time? We are going to be late. Ellen looked up at me and Ernest asked, Dad and Charlie will be here in 1 minute. Are we missing something important? Without hesitating, I said no. I just hate walking in late and sneaking down in the aisle. It's the 9 o'clock service, not the 9 to 5 service. She looked confused for a second, then grinned as she said, It's not a big deal, everyone's late sometimes, remember? I will throw a tardy party for you when we get home. Sometimes prerequisites and perfectionism are handed down in the very subtle ways. One of the very best pieces of parenting advice that I ever received was from the writer Toni Morrison. It was May of 2000, and Ellen was just shy of her first birthday. Miss Morrison, with an opera talking about her book, The Blues Eye, opera said, Toni said a beautiful thing about the messages that we get about who we are when a child first walks into a room. Miss Morrison explained that it's interesting to watch what happens when a child walks into a room, and she asked, Does your face light up? She explained. When my children used to walk in the room when they were little, I looked at them to see if they had buckled their trousers, or if their hair was combed, or if their socks were up. You think your affection and your deep love is on the display because you are caring for them? It's not. When you see you, they see the critical face. What's wrong now? Her advice was simple but paradigm shifting for me. She said, Let your face speak what's in your heart. When they walk in the room, my face says, I'm glad to see them. It's just as small as that. You see? I literally think about that advice every day. It's become a practice when Ellen comes bounding down the stairs dressed for school and I don't want my first comment to be, Pull your hair back, or those shoes don't match your dress. I want my face to convey how happy I am to see her, to be with her. When Charlie comes in the back door and he's sweaty and dirty from catching lizard, I want to flash a smile before I say, Don't touch anything until you wash your hands. So we think that we earn parenting points by being critical, put out, and exasperated. This first look can be prerequisites or worthiness builders. I don't want to criticize when my kids walk in the room. I want to light up. In addition to keeping a mindful eye on the prerequisites and perfectionism, we can help our children keep and cultivate their sense of worthiness in another way, one that relates back to what we learned about the differences between shame and guilt. Research indicates that parenting is a primary predictor of how prone our children will be to the shame or guilt in other world. We have a lot of influence over how our kids think about themselves and their struggle. Knowing as we do the same is positively correlated with addiction, depression, aggression, violence, eating disorder, and suicide. And that guilt is inversely correlated with these outcomes. We naturally would want to raise children who use more guilt, self-talk than shame. This means we need to separate our children from their behavior. As it turns out, there is a significant difference between you are bad and you did something bad. And no, it's not just semantic. Shame correlates the part of us that believe we can do and be better. When we shame and label our children, we take away the opportunity to grow and try on new behavior. If a child tells a lie, she can change that behavior. If she is a liar, where is the potential for change in that? Cultivating more guilt, self-talk, and less shame. Self-talk requires rethinking how we discipline and talk to our children, but it also means explaining this concept to our kids. Children are very receptive to talking about the shame if we are willing to do it. By the time they are 4 and 5, we can explain to them the difference between the guilt and shame and how much we love them even when they make bad choices. When Ellen was in the kindergarten, her teacher called me at home one afternoon and said, I totally get what you do now. When I asked her why, she said that earlier in the week she had looked over at Ellen, who was in the glitter center, and said, Ellen, you are a mess. Apparently, Ellen got a very serious look on her face and said, I may be making a mess, but I'm not a mess. That's the day I became that parent. Charlie also gets the distinction between shame and guilt. When I found our dog pulling food out of the trash can, I scolded her by saying, Bad girl. Charlie came sliding around the corner shouting, Daisy is a good girl who made a bad choice. We love her, we just don't love her choices. When I tried to explain the difference by saying, "This is dog Charlie," his response was, "I see this is a good dog who made a bad choice." Shame is just so painful for children because it is inextricably linked to the fear of being unlovable. For young children who are still dependent on their parents for survival, for food, shelter, and safety, feeling unlovable is a threat to survival. It's a trauma. I'm convinced that the reasons most of us revert back to feeling childlike and small when we are in the shame is because our brains store our early shame experiences as a trauma. And when it's triggered, we return to the place. We don't have the neurobiological research yet to confirm this, but I have quoted hundreds of interviews that follow the shame pattern. I don't know what happens. My boss called me an idiot in front of my team and I couldn't respond. All of a sudden, I'm back in Merce's Porter second grade class and I'm speechless. I cannot come back with one decent response. Or, my son struck out for the second time and I couldn't see straight. I always said I would never do what my dad did to me, but there I was screaming at him in front of his teammates. I'm not even sure how it happened. In the chapter 3, we learn the brain process social rejection, or some the same exact way it processes physical pain. I suspect we will eventually have the data to support my hypothesis about children sharing shame as a trauma. But in the meantime, I can say without hesitation that childhood experiences of shame change who we are, how we think about ourselves, and our sense of self-worth. We can work hard not to use shame as a parenting tool, but our children are still going to encounter shame in the outside world. The good news is that when children understand the distinction between shame and guilt, and when they know that we are interested and open to talking about these feelings and experiences, they are much more likely to talk to us about the shame experiences they may encounter with teachers, coaches, clergy, babysitters, grandparents, and other adults who have influence in their life. And this is critically important because it gives us the opportunity to grab shame the way we do. I often use a scrapbook as a metaphor to talk about the impact shame has on children. As parents, once we learn about shame, we will more than likely realize that yes, we have shamed our children. It happens. Even to shame researchers, given the severity of the outcomes around shame, we will also begin to worry that the shaming moments that happen outside our home will define our children, despite our best effort in the family. And those experiences will happen, naming, calling, put downs, and teasing are rampant in our culture of cruelty. And the good news, however, is that we have a lot of influence over how much power those experiences have in our children's lives. Most of us can remember shaming events from childhood that felt defining, but more than likely we remember them because we didn't process those experiences with parents who were open to talking about shame and committed to having us cultivate shame resilience. I don't blame my parents for that any more than I judge my grandmother letting me stand next to her in the front seat while she was driving, and they didn't have access to the information we have today, knowing what I do now. I think about shame and worthiness in this way. It's the album, not the picture. If you imagine opening up photo album, and many of the pages are full of 8 by 10 photos of shaming event, you will close that album and walk away thinking, shame defines that story. If, on the other hand, you open that album and see a few small photos of shame experiences, but each one is surrounded by a picture of worthiness, hope, struggle, resilience, courage, failure, success, and vulnerability, the shame experiences are only a part of a larger story. They don't define the album. Again, we cannot shame-proof our children, and our task is studying, teaching, and modeling shame resilience. And that starts with conversation about what shame is and how it shows up in our lives. The adult I interview who were raised by parents who use shame as a primary parenting tool had much more difficulty believing in their worthiness than the participants who experience shame occasionally and were able to talk about it with their parents. If you have grown children and are wondering if it's too late to teach them resilience or teach them the album, the answer is no, it's not too late. The power of owning our stories, even the difficult ones, is that we get to write the ending. Several years ago, I received a letter from a woman who wrote, "Your work changed my life.
in a very strange way. My mom saw you speak at the church in Amarillo. Afterwards, she wrote me a long letter that said, I had no idea that there was a difference between shame and guilt, and I think I shamed you your entire life. I mean, to use guilt. I never thought you were not good enough. I did not like your choices, but I'm shamed you. I cannot take that back, but I need you to know that you are the best thing that ever happened to me, and I'm so proud to be your mother. I couldn't believe it. My mom is 75 and I'm 55. It helped so much and it changed everything, including the way I parent my own kids. In addition to helping our children understand shame and use guilt self talk rather than shame self talk, we have to be very careful about the shame leakage. Even if we don't shame our children, shame still shows up in our lives in ways that can have a powerful effect on our family. Basically, we cannot raise children who are more shame resilient than we are. I can encourage Ellen to love her body, but what really matters are the observations she makes about my relationship with my own body. Damn it. I can suit Charlie's concern that he might run the wrong direction around the bases by telling him that he does not have to fully understand the ins and outs of baseball before his first T-ball game. But does he observe me and Steve trying new things, making mistakes, and failing without becoming self-critical? Damn it again. Lastly, normalizing is one of the most powerful shame resilience tools that we can offer our children. Like I explained in the last chapter, normalizing means helping our children know they are not alone and that we have experienced many of the shame struggle. And this applies to social situations, changes in their body, shaming experiences, feeling left out, and wanting to be brave but feeling afraid. There is something sacred that happens between a parent and a child, where the parent says, me too, or shares a personal story that relates to their child's struggle. Minding the gap. Supporting our children means supporting each other. I believe it's important at this point to pause, to recognize for shaming nature of parenting values debates. When you listen to conversation or read books and blogs about controversial and or divisive issues in parenting, like how and where women labor, circumcision, vaccinations, co-sleeping, feeding, and etc. What you hear is human, what you see is hard, deep hard. You see people, mostly mothers, engaging in the exact same behaviors that are earlier defined as shaming, name calling, put downs, and bullying. And here is what I have come to believe about these behaviors. You cannot claim to care about the welfare of children if you are shaming other parents for the choices they are making. Those are mutually exclusive behavior and they create a huge values gap. And yes, most of us, myself included, have a strong opinion on every one of those topics. But if we really care about the broader welfare of children, our job is to make choices that are aligned with our values and support other parents who are doing the same. Our job is also to tend to our own worthiness when we feel good about the choices we are making and we are engaging with the world from a place of worthiness rather than scarcity. We feel no need to judge and attack. It's easy to put up a straw man in this argument and say, so we are just supposed to ignore parents who are abusing their children? Fact that someone is making different choices from us does not in itself constitute abuse. If there is a real abuse happening, by all means call the police. If not, we shouldn't call it abuse. As a social worker who spent a year interning at Child Protective Services, I have a little tolerance for debate that casually use the term abuse or neglect to scare or belittle parents who are simply doing things that we judge as wrong, different, or bad. In fact, I have sworn off the good-bad parenting dichotomy simply because on any given day you could file me under both good parent and bad parent, depending on your perspective and how things are going for me. I just don't see what values this judgmental frame adds to our life or to the larger parenting conversation. In fact, it's a shame storm waiting to happen. To me, the questions of parenting value is about engagement. Are we paying attention, thinking through our choices, open to learning and being wrong, curious and willing to ask questions? What I have learned from my work is that there are a million ways out in the world to be a wonderful, engaged parent, and some of them are going to bump up against what I personally think about parenting. For example, Steve and I were very strict about what we let the kids watch on TV, especially when it comes to violence. We think about it, talk about it, and make the best decision we can. On the other hand, we have got friends who let their children watch movies and shows that we don't allow Ellen or Charlie watch. But you know what? They also think about it and talk about it and make the best decision they can. They just come to a different conclusion that we did, and I respect that, and we recently found ourselves on the other side of this issue when some good friends expressed surprise that we let Ellen read the Hunger Games. Again, as parents were also engaged in the questions and the conversation. We had shown mutual respect and empathy. Minding the gap can be particularly challenging when honoring difference in one of our aspirational values, and I think the key is remembering that when other parents make different choices than we are making, it's not necessarily criticism. Daring greatly means finding our own path and respecting what that search looks like for other folks. Minding the gap of belonging. Worthiness is about love and belonging, and one of the best ways to show our children that our love for them is unconditional is to make sure they know they belong in our families. I know that sounds strange, but it's a very powerful and at times heart-wrenching issue for children. On page 145, I define belonging as the innate human desire to be part of something larger than us. One of the biggest surprises in this research was learning that fitting in and belonging are not the same thing. In fact, fitting in is one of the greatest barriers to belonging. Fitting in is about assessing a situation and becoming who you need to be in order to be accepted. Belonging, on the other hand, does not require us to change who we are. It requires us to be who we are. When I asked a large group of 8th graders to break into small teams and come up with the differences between fitting in and belonging, their answers floored me. Belonging is being somewhere where you want to be and they want you. Fitting in is being somewhere where you really want to be but they don't care one way or the other. Belonging is being accepted for you. Fitting in is being accepted for being like everyone else. I get to be me if I belong. I have to be like you to fit in. They nailed the definitions. It doesn't matter where in the country I ask this question or what type of school I'm visiting. Middle and high school students understand how this works. They also talk openly about the hard age of not feeling a sense of belonging at home. And that first time I asked the 8th graders to come up with the definition, one student wrote, "Not belonging at school is really hard, but it's nothing compared to what it feels like when you don't belong at home." When I asked the student what that meant, they used these examples. Not living up to your parent expectation, not being as cool or popular as your parent wants you to be, not being as smart as your parents, not being good at something your parents were good at, your parents being embarrassed because you don't have enough friends or you are not an athlete or a cheerleader, your parents not liking you, who you are and what you like to do when your parents don't pay attention to your life. If we want to cultivate worthiness in our children, we need to make sure they know that they belong and that their belonging is unconditional. What makes that such a challenge is that most of us struggle to feel a sense of belonging, to know that we are a part of something, not despite our vulnerabilities, but because of them. We can't give our children what we don't have, which means we have to work to cultivate a sense of belonging alongside our children. Here is an example of how we can grow together and how our children are capable of great empathy. And when Ellen was in the 4th grade, she came home from school one day and burst into tears as soon as we shut the front door. Then ran up to her room. I immediately followed, then knelt down in front of her and asked her what was wrong. Through her sniffles, she said, "I'm so tired of being on the other. I'm sick of it." I didn't understand. So I asked her to explain what she meant by the other. "We play soccer every day at recess. The popular kids are the captain and the big The teams. The first captain says, I will take the Susie, John, Beat, Rabbit, and Jake. The second captain says, oh, I will take Andrew, Steve, Caddy, and Sue, and we can split the others. Every single day I'm one of the others. I never get to be named. My heart sank. She was sitting on the edge of her bed with her head in her hands. I was so concerned when I followed her into her room that I had not even flip on the light. I couldn't stand the vulnerability of seeing her sitting in the dark crying, so I walked over the light switch. It was divine intervention and an act of starting to turn on the lights. To alleviate my discomfort made me think of my favorite quote about darkness and compassion from Pema Condron, who writes, compassion is not a relationship between the healer and the wounded, it's a relationship between equals. Only when we know our own darkness well can we be present with the darkness of others. Compassion becomes real when we recognize our shared humanity. I left the light switch alone and walked back to sit with Alan in the literal and emotional dark. I put my arm around her shoulder and said, I know what it's like to be the other. She wiped her nose on the back of her hand and said, no, you don't. You are really popular. I wanted really to know what it feels like, I told her. When I feel like the other, I get angry and hurt, and I mostly feel small and lonely. I don't need to be popular, but I want people to recognize me and treat me like I matter, like I belong. She couldn't believe it. You do know? That is exactly how I feel. We snuggled on her bed, and she told me about her research experiences, and I told her about some of my experiences in school when otherness is both powerful and painful. About 2 weeks later, we were both at home. When that mail arrived, I ran to the door with a great anticipation. I was scheduled to speak at a star-studded event, and I was dying to see the publicity poster. It seems weird now, but I was so excited at the idea of seeing my photo next to the picture of the movie stars. I sat down on the couch with the poster, I unrolled it, and I started scanning like a mad woman. Just as I was doing this, Alan walked in and said, cool, is that your poster? Let me see. As we walked over the couch, she could tell my mood had changed from anticipation to disappointment. What's wrong, Mom? I patted the couch and she sat down next to me. I held the poster up and she traced the picture with her finger. I don't see you. Where are you? I pointed at the line on the poster under the celebrity photos that said, and others. Alan leaned back against the sofa, cautious, with her head on my shoulder, and said, oh, Mom, I think you are the others. I'm sorry. I didn't reply right away. I was feeling small put because there was no picture, and for carrying that word, there was no picture. Alan leaned forward, looked at me, and said, I know what that feels like when I'm the other. I feel hurt and small and lonely. We all want to matter and belong. It turned out to be one of the best moments of my life. We may not always have a sense of belonging on the recess playground or at a big fancy conference, but in that moment we knew that we belong where it mattered the most, at home. Parenting perfection is not the goal. In fact, the best gift, the best teaching moment happened in those imperfect moments when we allow children to help us mind the gap. Here is a powerful story about cultivating shame resilience and minding the gap from Susan. A woman in an interview a couple of years ago, Susan was busy talking to a group of mothers at her kids' school while her kids were standing close by waiting for her to take them home. The mothers were discussing who would host the welcome kinder kids party for the new students. They all hated the thought of doing it, but the one woman who volunteered to throw the party had a filthy house. After talking about this woman in her house for a few minutes, they agreed that letting her host the party would reflect poorly on them and the video. When they finished their discussion, Susan loaded up the kids and started home. Susan's first grade son randomly called out from the back seat, I think you are a great mom. Susan smiled and said, well, thank you. A few minutes after they walked in the house, the same child came up to her with big tears in his eyes. He looked at Susan and said, do you feel bad about yourself? Are you okay? Susan said she was completely taken by surprise. She knelt down and said, no, why? What's wrong? Her son replied, you always say that when people get together and talk bad about someone just because they are different, it means they might feel bad about themselves. You say that when we feel good about who we are, we don't say mean things about the other people. Susan immediately recognized that the warm wash of shame. She knew that her son had overheard the conversation at school. And this is the moment. The wholehearted parenting moment. Can we tolerate the vulnerability long enough to be with it for a minute? Or do we need to discharge the semen discovered by redirecting our child and or blaming them from crossing a line? Can we take this opportunity to acknowledge how wonderfully he is practicing empathy? Can we make mistakes and make amends? If we want our kids to only be honest about their experiences, can we own ours? Susan looked at her son and said, "Thank you so much for checking on me and asking me how I feel. I feel okay, but I think I made a mistake. I need a little time to think about all of this. You are right about one thing. I was saying hurtful things." After Susan pulled herself together, she sat down with her son and they talked. They discussed how easy it is to get catch up in the group situation where everyone is talking about someone. Susan was honest and admitted that she sometimes struggled with what people think. She said her son leaned into her and whispered, "Me too." They promised to keep talking to each other about their experiences. Engagement means investing time and energy. It means sitting down with our children and understanding their world, their interests, their stories. Engaged parent can be found on both sides and of all the conversational parenting debate. They come from different values, tradition, and culture, and what they share in common is practicing the values. What they seem to share is the philosophy of "I'm not perfect, I'm not always right, but I am here, open, paying attention, loving you, and fully engaged." There is no question that engagement requires sacrifice, but that's what we signed up for when we decided to become parents. Most of us have so many competing demands on our time that it's easy to think, "I cannot sacrifice 3 hours to sit down and review my son's Facebook page or sit with my daughter while they explain every detail of the fourth grade science fair scandal," and I struggle with that too. But Jimmy Grace, a priest from our Episcopal Church, recently gave a sermon about the nature of sacrifice, and it totally shifted how I think about parenting. He explained that it's in its original Latin form. Sacrifice means to make sacred or to make holy. I wholeheartedly believe that when we are fully engaged in parenting, regardless of how imperfect, vulnerable, and messy it is, we are creating something sacred. The courage to be vulnerable. Before writing this section, I spread my data all over my dining room table and asked myself this question: what do parents experience as the most vulnerable and bravest thing that they do? In their effort to raise wholehearted children, I thought it would take days to figure it out. But as I look over the field notes and answer result views, letting their children struggle and experience adversity as I travel across the country, there seems to be growing concern on the part of parent and teacher that children's not learning how to handle adversity or disappointment because we are always rescuing and protecting them. What's interesting is that the more often than not, I hear this concern from the same parent who are chronically intervening, rescuing, protecting. It's not that our children cannot stand the vulnerability of handling their own situation. It's that we cannot stand the uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure even when we know it's the right thing to do. I used to struggle with the letting go and allowing my children to find their own way, but something that I learned in the research dramatically changed my perspective, and I no longer see rescuing and intervening as unhelpful, and I think about it as dangerous. Don't get me wrong. I still struggle and still step in when I shouldn't, but I know, think twice before I let my discover dictate my behavior. Here is why. Hope is a function of struggle. If we want our children to develop high level of hopefulness, we have to let them struggle. And let me tell you, next to love and belonging, I'm not sure I want anything more for my kids than a deep sense of hopefulness. Experience with adversity, tenacity, and grit emerged in my research as an important quality of wholeheartedness. I was grateful to see it because it was one of the few qualities of wholeheartedness that I had at the time. When I went into the literature to search for a concept that had all these elements, I found C.R. Snyder's research on hope. I was shocked. First, I thought hope was a warm, fuzzy emotion, the feeling of possibility, and second, I was looking for something that I had thought as a being scrappy and nicknamed Plain B, and those walk turned to Plain B when Plain A fell apart. As it turns out, I was wrong about Hope and right about Scrappy and Plan B. According to Snyder, who dedicated his career to studying his topic, hope is not an emotion. It's a way of thinking or a cognitive process. Emotion plays a supporting role, but hope is really a thought process made up of what Snyder calls a trilogy of goals, pathways, and agency. In a very simple terms, hope happens when we have the ability to set realistic goals. I know where I want to go. Where we are able to figure out how to achieve these goals, including the ability to stay flexible, develop alternative routes. I know how to get there and I'm persistent and I can tolerate disappointment and try again. We believe in ourselves. I can do this. So, hope is a combination of setting goals, having a tenacity and perseverance to pursue them, and believing in our own abilities. Hope is plan B, and here is the part that inspired me to deal with my own vulnerability so I could step back and let my children learn how to figure some things out on their own. Hope is learned. According to Snyder, children most often learn hope from their parents. To learn thoughtfulness, children need relationships that are characterized by boundaries, consistency, and support, and children with a high level of hopefulness have experience with adversity. They have been given the opportunity to struggle, and in doing that, they learn how to believe in themselves. Raising children who are hopeful and who have the courage to be vulnerable means stepping back and letting them experience disappointment, deal with the conflict, learn how to assert themselves, and have the opportunity to fail. If we are always following our children into the arena, hushing the critic, assuring the victory, they will never learn that they have the ability to dare greatly on their own. One of the best lessons, and this comes from an experience that I had with Ellen. It began when I was still 10 cars away from her in the swim team pickup line. It was getting dark, so I could only make out her silhouette, but that was enough. I could tell something was wrong. By the way she was standing, she flung herself into the front seat, and before I could ask her about practice, she was in tears. What happened? What's wrong? Are you okay? She started out the window, drew a deep breath as she wiped her tears on the sleeve of her hoodie, and said, I have to swim the 100 bricks to rock at the mid of Saturday. I know this was a really bad thing in her world, so I tried not to seem relieved, which I was, because in the crazy but normal for me situation, I was already thinking of something really horrible had happened. You don't understand. I cannot swim breaststroke. I'm terrible. You don't get it. I begged him not to put me in that event. I was getting ready to respond with something emphatic and encouraging as I pulled into the driveway, but just then she looked me right in the eyes, put her hand on top of my hand, and said, Please, Mom, please help me. I'm still going to be swimming when the other girls are getting out of the pool and the next hit is getting on the block. I'm really that slow. I couldn't swallow. I couldn't think clearly all of a sudden. I'm 10 years old and I'm on the block getting ready to swim for the Memorial Northwest Maryland. My dad is the starter and he's giving me the win or die look. I'm in the lane closest to the wall. The slow lane, it's going to be a disaster. Mom and earlier I was sitting on the ready bench contemplating making a run for my banana seat bike leaning against the fence by the diving boards. I overheard the coach say, Let's just swim her up and age group. I'm not sure she can finish the race, but it will be interesting. Mom, are you listening to me? Will you help me? Will you talk to the coach and see if he will put me in another race? The vulnerability felt unbearable and I wanted to scream, Yes, you don't have to swim an event that you don't want to swim ever, but I didn't. Calm was one of my new wholehearted practices. So I took a deep breath, counted to 5 and said, Let me talk to your dad. After the kids went to the bed, Stephen spent an hour debating the issue and finally agreed that she would have to take it up with her coach. If he wanted her to swim that race, she needed to swim it as right as the decision felt. I hated every minute of it. And I tried everything from picking a fight with Steve to blaming the coach of defending my fear and discharging the vulnerability. Ellen was upset when we told her this, even more upset when she came home from practice and told us that her coach thought it was important for her to get an official time for the event. She folded her arms on the table, put her head down and cried. At one point she lifted up her head and said, I could just stretch the event. A lot of people miss their hits. A part of me thought perfect, but then she said, I won't win. I'm not even good enough to get second or third place. Everyone is going to be watching. And this was the opportunity to move the laughers, to redefine what's important to her, to make our family culture more influential than the swim meet. Her friends and the ultra competitive support cultures this rampant in our community. I look at her and said, you can scratch that event. I would probably consider that abortion too. But what if your goal for that race is not to win or even to get out of the water at the same time as the other girls? What if your goal is to show up and get wet? Still look at me as if I was crazy. So just show up and get in the water. I explained that I had spent many years never trying anything that I was not already good at doing, and how those choices almost made me forget what it feels like to be brave. I said, sometimes the bravest and the most important thing you can do is just show up. Steve and I made sure that we were not with her when her heat was cold. When it was time for the girls to get on the block, I was not sure if she would be there, but she was. We stood at the end of her lane and held our breath. She looked right at us, nodded her head, and snapped her goggles into place. She was the last one out of the pool, and the other swimmer had already left the deck, and there was a girl standing on the block ready for the next heat. Steve and I screamed and cheered the entire time. When she got out of the pool, she walked over to her coach, who gave her a hug and then showed her something about her cake. When she finally made her way to us, she was smiling and a little cheerful. She looked at her dad and me and said, that was pretty bad, but I did it. I showed up and I got wet. I was brave. I wrote the following parenting manifesto because I needed. Steve and I needed putting down the measuring stick in a culture that uses acquisition and accomplishment to assess worth is not easy. I used the manifesto as the touchstone, a prayer and a meditation when I'm wrestling with vulnerability or when I have got that never enough fear. It reminds me of the finding that's changed and probably saved my life. Who we are and how we engage with the world are much stronger predictors of how our children will do than what we know about parenting. The Wholehearted Parenting Manifesto. Above all else, I want you to know that you are loved and lovable. You will learn this from my words and action. The lesson on love are in how I treat you and how I treat myself. I want you to engage with the world from a place of worthiness. You will learn that you are worthy of love, belonging, and joy. Every time you see me practice self-compassion and embrace my own imperfection, we will practice courage in our family by showing up, letting ourselves be seen, and honoring vulnerability. We will share our stories of struggle and strange. There will always be room in our home for both. We will teach you compassion by practicing compassion with ourselves first. Then, with each other, we will set and respect boundaries. We will honor hard work, hope, perseverance, and rest and play will be family values as well as family practices. You will learn accountability and respect by watching me make mistakes and make amends and by watching how I ask for what I need to talk about how I feel. I want you to know joy, so together we will practice gratitude. I want you to feel joy, so together we will learn how to be vulnerable. And when uncertainty and scarcity visit, you will be able to draw from the spirit that is a part of our everyday life. Together we will cry and face the fear and grief. I will want to take away your pain, but instead I will sit with you and teach you how to feel it. We will laugh and sing and dance and create. We will always have permission to be vulnerable with each other. No matter what, you will always belong here as you begin your wholehearted journey. And the greatest gift that I can give you to you is to live and love with my whole heart and to dare greatly. I will not teach you of love or show you anything perfectly, but I will let you see me, and I will always hold sacred the gift of seeing you, truly deeply seeing you. Thank you. Final thoughts. It's not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbled or where the door of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, who's faced immersed by dozens sweetened blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows the great enthusiasm and the great devotion, who spends himself in worthy causes, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fail well, daring greatly. Theodore Roosevelt. Thank you for listening. Have a great